the departments that are within the Ministry of the Presidency as we continue in future programs. Today, one of the departments that I did not mention is that of IAST. Most of you know it as IAST. That's the Institute of Applied Science and Technology. The director of IAST is Professor Suresh Narine. Now, he is one of the many things. He wears a lot of hats, many hats. And one of them is the director of the Institute of Applied Science and Technology. And today our conversation is based on his functions of as the director of that institute. Professor Suresh Narine, welcome to Conversations in State, and I'm happy to have you as our first guest.
Thank you, Malika.
All right, great to have you. Viewers, today what we're going to be doing is, because we only have 30 minutes with you, unfortunately, and this is not going to be the last appearance of the director of IAST on this program, but as we continue with future programs, he will return. So today it's just basically an introduction and to remind you what's the purpose and the functions of IAST. And also he'll be talking about a very important product produced by IAST, and of course he'll tell you how Guyanese can benefit from it, especially women, and how they are already benefiting. But before we even talk about that product, let's talk about science and technology, Professor. As many people will agree, Guyana seems to always be behind when it comes to development and so on. How do you feel we are behind when it comes to science and technology?
Well, Malika, so that's a good question. I think that, like many developing countries, Guyana certainly lags behind, in many cases, the Caribbean, but certainly in our hemisphere, in science and technology.
Yes.
The developing countries, it is very difficult to spend the requisite percentages of our GDP, for example, on things like science and technology, because there are so many other needs clamoring for resources.
Okay.
That said, on the other hand, science and technology is so pivotal to development that it's somewhat of a catch-22. As you know, Guyana not only has a paucity of science and technology infrastructure, but we tend to lose a significant portion of the people we train.
Yes.
So we have a paucity of science and technology human capital as well. And I think that this is a multifaceted issue, which requires, of course, multifaceted approaches in order to stem. So it's not only a factor of investment, it's also a factor of culture, it's a factor of focus, and this is why I'm so delighted that you've chosen to talk to us about science and technology as your first program, because I think it's also a factor of popularization. So many of our young people are no longer encouraged to do science and technology. In our region, unfortunately, many of our young people are motivated to be sports personalities, musicians, doctors and lawyers.
Yes.
And very few scientists are showcased to talk about the trajectories that scientists can have in terms of a career, in terms of impact on their communities, in terms of the kinds of lives that scientists can aspire to. Now, all of that said, to come back to your real question, how far are we behind? We are behind, but there are aspects of science and technology in Guyana, even though we're behind, which are already making significant impacts. And I'm sure you're going to want to talk about some of those.
Before you talk about that, I'm happy that you spoke of the importance of science and technology and the fact that, yes, our young people, when you ask them what they want to be a lawyer, doctor, nurse. One might argue that, again, we are not yet, as a country, we are not yet in a position to actually fully employ a scientist or people who may now say that, okay, after listening to Professor Narine, I may want to change my careers. And this is not for the very little ones. I'm talking for the people who are almost at university level. There may be that argument that we are not in a position as a country to position scientists.
But that isn't so. There are a plenitude of areas in which we can employ young scientists.
Mhm.
I have just recently agreed to be the co-chair of a new program at the University of Guyana, for instance, which focuses on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And so we're stepping up the obvious need to have scientists. But there are other places,
Yeah.
like the Institute of Applied Science and Technology.
Mhm.
We find it very difficult to attract young scientists. And so if one of the outcomes of your program, I hope, will be an increase in applicants to the Institute. But there are also the National Agricultural Research Institute, NARI,
Mhm.
and there are a growing number of private sector as well as public and private sector jobs that relate to the science and technology sector. As Guyana moves more into manufacturing, as we begin to open up what has become known as the green economy,
Yes.
all of that will be fueled by scientists. And there's another niche which is for entrepreneurial, science-minded people. Those who can see the nexus between having scientific acumen and using that acumen to be sound businessmen and women. An example would suffice. We have a plenitude of produce in our agricultural sector. We have a dearth of agro-processing. Now, all of your viewers know this, but very few people have actually injected the kinds of processing and packaging approaches that can create significantly high-value products. At the same time, we're part of CARICOM and CSME. The English-speaking Caribbean imports 4.5 billion US dollars annually in imported food. Now, much of that food is packaged. Much of that food is processed. Guyana, with its tremendous ability to produce, has a significant opportunity to service that need if we are able to inject the right technology, the right kinds of science, and marry that with those opportunities. So not only in the state sector, not only in the established private sector that is involved in manufacturing, but also in the entrepreneurial employment of science and technology. There's a tremendous opportunity for young people to realize very rewarding careers. And this is one of the things that we also do at the IAST that we don't talk about a lot, is we provide mentorship for those kinds of people.
All right. Even before we talk about the mentorship, I'm happy you talked about packaging and processing and so on. Now that brings me to the role and the functions of IAST. Let's talk about what, of course, viewers, we may not be able to get to every single thing because, as we did say, this is only a 30-minute broadcast, but have no fear, Professor Narine will be back in future programs. But now let's talk about IAST, its roles and functions in helping us to use science and technology to more or less alleviate poverty in our country.
Well, the IAST has less than 20 technical staff, so we are challenged in terms of staffing. However, we do have one of the best laboratories in the world, and perhaps the best in this hemisphere, for a series of tests, measurements, and experimentation. We also have people who are very trained in technology transfer. So oftentimes, if we don't have a process that we can do for you on our own, we have the ability to source the technology and adapt it to our needs here. And so our focus is to strike a balance in the science continuum that allows us to turn ideas and resources into commercializable products. For a very long time, the Institute has been hamstrung by an inability to attract the right kinds of science minds and to marry those science minds with the right presence of infrastructure. Over the past 10 to 12 years, that has slowly changed, so much so that we now host a really significantly impactful array of equipment and have been able to attract and retain a remarkable group of young people who are fueled, really motivated by seeing science and technology employed in real ways and in ways which change communities. So our role, to spell it out, is to act as that interface between ideas, resources, sometimes needs, and sometimes environmental impacts, spillages, pollution, etc. Our role is to act at that interface between an opportunity or a problem, the employment of science and technology, and then it's rolling those solutions out into the community at large, in order to address several factors. One and foremost is development and commercialization, but not commercialization and development without a view towards sustainability, without a view towards skills training, without a view to overlay on scientific solutions business approaches that allow people to actually climb up the value chain. So we're very focused on not creating commoditized approaches to development where profit and gain resides at only a level that is capital intensive. But we're very careful to overlay business solutions so that those values can also raise up the level which usually resides at a labor level. And so it's focused on development. It's also focused on interventive measures to assess things like impacts of mining, impacts of industrial effluent on our waterways. So we offer a very impressive array of environmental testing capacities.
And you can also give advice to government and other agencies and so on that would have an interest.
Correct. And we do collaborate widely with several sister agencies like NARI, like the Food and Drug Department, like Bureau of Standards, the Toxics and Chemicals Board. And increasingly, we have been called upon to provide scientific advice to government decision making also. Now that all said, it's hard to imagine that a group of 20 people
can do
all of that.
Yes.
And so the obvious question is how. What we have done is we have put together an array of collaborations across South America, in the Caribbean, and in North America, and sometimes as far away as China and Malaysia and Israel, which allows us, if the skills don't reside at the IAST, it allows us to reach out to our collaborators elsewhere, get solutions, but then what our team has become very adept at doing is modifying those solutions to suit the local needs. It's very easy to Google a solution for a local problem, but it's very difficult to airlift that solution and plug and play it
into.
Usually what we need is local hands that are skilled and an ability to exploit those solutions in our local realities. And so IAST provides that sort of introductory role, that role to sort of bootstrap people into getting the ability to exploit the solutions.
Okay, Professor, we have to eventually, on this very program this week, get to Rupununi Essence. And of course, viewers, for those of you who are not yet familiar with Rupununi Essence, we have an advertisement for you on the benefits of the product. But even before we get to that, Professor, I must ask you, how has and how much, if it is enough, the current administration would have been able to contribute to the functions of IAST?
We have been very fortunate at the IAST to have had the support of not only this administration but the previous administration. I think that one of the unfortunate facts about our country is that sometimes we think things start and stop with political systems. I've been delighted that we have experienced no interruption in the support for IAST. We have found that the administrative change at the political level has actually not impacted us in any way that's negative.
Okay.
And one of the changes that has been good for us is that we have found in the new minister and the new Ministry of Indigenous Peoples Affairs a remarkable level of receptivity.
Okay.
And so I like to stay away from whether one